Hi, everyone. Welcome to the B++ podcast, a podcast where we speak to leaders from around the world, leaders who can actually impact your lives, your businesses with all the solutions that they are building or they are recommending, and today I'm very happy to welcome somebody all the way from Toronto, Canada, who is helping so many organizations, large and now increasingly small and startups. Sam Gupta, who's a principal consultant of ElevatIQ, and he's the host of WBS Rocks podcast. A lot to talk about. Thank you so much for being here, Sam.
Glad to be here, Abhi. Thank you so much. And I'm super excited to talk to your fun listeners.
Yeah, I'm sure they are looking forward to a lot of stories that you mentioned that you have to share. And the first thing that I wanted to check with you was, you've spent 2 decades working with Fortune 500 companies and, you've helped them a lot. And then you decided that you want to help startups and you want to sort of help SMEs as well. So what prompted that shift and how's the experience been so far?
Well, so it was a crazy story. Okay. So initially I was always sort of entrepreneurial because I grew up in a very business centric family. Okay. Mm-hmm. So by the time I went to university, I just knew too much. My family background is really into the manufacturing and distribution. And right. They have a saying there, let's say if you are a 5-year-old, you are not supposed to be on the shop floor. Okay. So if you cannot be on the shop floor as a 5-year-old, one thing you can do is you can count money. Okay. Because the family I grew up in, we had piles of cash. Okay. Yeah. We used to get tons and tons of cash. So somebody has to count that. So I started, that was my first job. Okay. Right. And then the second job was really, since you cannot be on the shop floor, you can do accounting. Right. So I started doing a lot more books. So by the time I went to my university, I had too much experience in doing manufacturing, production, from the business perspective. And then I started spending a lot of time in the enterprise consulting space, as you know, roughly 10 years, because I was doing a startup right after my undergrad. But I just could not make enough money, to be honest. Okay. I wasn't happy about it. So I thought maybe, I should get, some more context and experience in the enterprise space. And after that, I will see what I can do. So yeah, roughly 10, 12 years I was in the enterprise space. With me, one of the problem is I always need to see the far end. And if I'm not able to see that, then it's just harder for me to be sort of driven, right? So I need to know how this is, whatever I'm doing, how this is impacting the organization. And since I was in the enterprise space, sometimes, if I am spending a lot of effort in building something, sometimes that will not go live because the business priorities change or something else changes. And because of that, I will not feel as recognized. So I wanted to do something of my own, and that's why I started doing this journey of SMB and startups. But when I really started doing this, I was doing more of part-time, but then my wife actually pushed me over the edge, to be honest, okay? Because she was super confident in terms of, how I should be doing these startups, right? And then one day she said that, I know everything. I know how to build a company because she has some experience, with working with one of the CEOs. But honestly speaking, she did not know anything. Okay. She had $8,000 in her bank account. Okay. And she said that, I know how to create the company. You can start this in $8,000. And I was like, are you serious? Okay. Have you really done this? And she's like, yeah, I've done it. I know it. We started doing this. It was a crazy ride. It has been a crazy ride. Obviously, $8,000 is not enough. I would not recommend anybody doing that. But in my case, I am more of the execution guy. But once I get into anything, I will execute it. Okay. So that's who I am. So that's how, shifted the transition. I don't know if this answers your question or not.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds exciting. The crazy optimism that comes with entrepreneurism, like in the sense you have to believe in yourself, even with $8,000. That's amazing. And the visual that I can't get out of my head is piles and piles of cash. Talk of the abundance mindset, So, that's so exciting in the sense that I understand what you mean. I've had that experience in my life where, when you work with a lot of very large organizations in a consulting role, or let's say, working with them, is you can't really always have that impact because there are so many forces at play. Priorities change. We've had so many like multi-million dollar projects being mothballed because suddenly, oh no, we don't need that anymore. And what about those 50 people who've been working on it for the last 5 years? And so I understand when you say that you wanted to have that impact and you wanted to work with SMEs and you wanted to work with startups. So let's talk about some of the biggest challenges that you see, right? So I mean, on the one hand, let's say it's very difficult to have that impact in a large company because obviously too many decision makers, too many forces at play. But SMEs and startups have their own challenges, right? In the sense that they number one being money, right? So in the sense,
Yeah.
so what are some of the challenges that you face working with SMEs and startups in terms of you mentioned earlier about enterprise architecture, and let's say you're working with them, you're consulting for them, and you're saying, why don't we go ahead and do this? So what are some of the biggest challenges that you see and experience all the time, and what are some of the ways that you overcome them? Because the reason I'm asking this is a lot of startup founders, obviously being our listeners, they are struggling with a lot of these things. So they want to sort of implement a lot of tools, they want to implement a lot of systems, but they either don't have the money, or in a lot of cases that we see, they do not have somebody to manage those systems or take ownership of those systems. So how do we go about
So typically, my recommendation, and I'm going to touch this from two different perspectives. One is
that? Sure.
going to be sales and marketing and operations, right, and the second is going to be really from the tool and enterprise architecture
Right.
perspective. So when I started doing SMB, I had no idea what I was getting into, to be honest. Okay, it's been a ride.
Mm.
Number one, I was always involved in the sales and pre-sales in the consulting space, but
Right.
the kind of sales we do in the enterprise space is very different than the way SMB space works.
Right.
Customers are going to be extremely price sensitive. They are not going to have the kind of appetite that enterprise customers are going to have. Their
Right.
needs are different. Everything is so different. So
Right.
in my case, let's talk about some of the challenges, right? So I was just like a teenager. I wanted to run after every shiny object
Mm.
out there. So when I started MEC, I actually went after every buzzwords or the technology, if you name it, right? So we did a lot of work in the medical device space. We did a lot of work in the co-working space. You talk fintech, martech. Oh my goodness. I mean, see, whatever cool buzzwords that we could find out. I mean, see, we actually wanted to work on that idea.
Right.
And by the way, none of them were successful, to be honest. Okay, because I was not really focusing on my core. That was the biggest challenge, right? Because I just didn't know what I should be focusing on. I
Right.
had no idea if I should be able to create a startup, in the ERP world, or maybe in the consulting world. It was just hard. So that is the conviction that I actually got through my
Mm.
journey. And in fact, I always talk about this in a lot of different podcast episodes, that I worked for free for guys who were 24 years old.
Mm.
Okay. For roughly a year or two, just to learn how to sell in the SMB space.
Right.
So again, acquiring these skills based on the market, based on the product that you are working with, based on the customers you are dealing with, these skills are extremely important. Now, coming back to your question about the enterprise architecture and tools, typically my recommendation always is, depending upon your business, depending upon your company, what you are doing, first focus on the market need. First focus on if you can bring some sort of revenue. Okay, then work on the idea. I will tell you one story. So there was, I was talking to one of my friends, and she has amazing experience in supply chain. She and her brother is working on one of these startup ideas, and she's brilliant. Her brother is amazing coder, amazing programmer. Okay, so they started working on the idea that is around ERP. They are trying to sort of, build slightly user-friendly plugin on top of ERP. It's going to be ERP agnostic, but in their case, they did not do any sort of market research. Okay, they did not have a problem to solve, but they started working on this tool. This is working great, and now they are coming to me. Okay, tell me how to sell this. And I'm like, okay, did you sell it to anybody so far? And they are like, no. I mean, that's why I'm coming to you. I'm like, did you do any research? And they had spoken to a bunch of folks. I'm like, okay, tell me one salesperson you have spoken to. And that salesperson needs to have experience in the ERP space. If you don't have in the ERP space, then I'm not going to count that as your market research, because salespeople are going to give you the real advice, right? Because they are the ones who are running in the field. They are the ones who actually know what is happening in the field, what customers care for. So in this particular case, they invested a lot of time, they invested a lot of money in doing the tool, in doing the technology as well. But I don't know where it is going to go. So my recommendation always is figure out how to start from your sales and marketing, how to start from your customer, how to start from your problem, then figure out, how to do the tool or technology. That's a secondary part in my mind.
Right. I mean, yeah, a lot of valuable insights there. I mean, firstly, that you mentioned how difficult it is to sell anything in the SME space, and obviously for, very obvious reasons. And yeah, the other thing that you mentioned was, and I'm glad you did, is because a lot of founders are chasing the buzzwords, and I guess everyone has a bit of a journey that they have to follow. And, you learn lessons along the way, of course, very valuable lessons along the way. And how it's very important to, stick to your sort of expertise, something that you pointed out as well. So yeah, a lot of very interesting things that you mentioned there. So, I mean, you mentioned about the massive difference between selling in the enterprise space and the SMB space. So, before we jump into the tools, and, I'm glad you mentioned the fact that, focus on your marketing teams and sales teams and ask them what it is that they need before you sort of worry about the tools. But what is, let's say, what are some of the 2 or 3 things that you've learned, in terms of selling? Because, I won't name it, but one of the world's largest CRM companies, we work with them very closely, and they are struggling here in Southeast Asia because it's easy to project, how they will sell in the SME space, but they're just not able to sell. So what are some of the key insights that you can share? I'm sure a lot of people running global software companies here in Asia and other parts of the world would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so in the SMB market, I mean, as you know, they are not going to have really the IT background or IT skills or the technical skills. In the enterprise space, you are typically dealing with a CIO because they have either the center of excellence or the IT or technical expertise in-house. So that's why selling to your enterprise is very different. In case of SMB market, number one, they are going to have significant challenges with respect to budget. Number two, they don't really have skills. They don't really understand how software works, to be honest. Okay. So selling to them is completely different. You have to have some sort of package. If you are going to tell them, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I've got this tool. I have no idea how to solve your problem. I'm actually going to come to your premise or facility or factory or whatever they have, right? And then I'm actually going to talk to your people. I'm going to do your requirements. And after that, I'm going to customize the software a little bit. It could be just the configuration, but still, they are not going to be ready for that. They will not be willing to take any ownership. They are super tight on time because obviously they have to focus on their own sales. So timing is going to be a problem. Focus is going to be a problem. Budget is going to be a problem. Understanding is going to be a problem. Skills is going to be a problem. Too many problems in the SMB market. So the best way to sell in the SMB market is make it easy. Make it as if you are selling a product, okay? As if they are buying an Apple iPhone. They don't have to think. Reduce the number of variables. Reduce the number of decisions that they have to make in making that purchase. Obviously, it's not easy in case of software. It's never easy, right? But the more friction you are going to remove from your sales cycle. Now, coming back to your point about the CRM company, not able to penetrate in the emerging market, right? Now, emerging market is very different from your developed countries, just because the appetite is different, right? The kind of things that they understand is going to be very different as well. So one of the things that companies really need to think about penetrating in the SMB market is how can I put the industry flavor on the technology? And that is what everybody is doing in the market at this point of time. Okay, in the SMB market, you talk about bigger players, your SAPs of the world, Oracles of the world, Salesforces of the world, Inforce of the world. Everybody is trying to put the industry flavor because the more flavor you have of the industry, obviously, number one, you will be able to connect with your customers. Okay, because you are going to speak their language, the language that they understand. And then it's going to be easier for them to be able to digest because they don't get technology. They
Right.
don't get software, irrespective of how cool it is. They will hang up on you if you don't speak their language.
Sure. I mean that's a great thing that you mentioned, right? So make it easy, right? So for instance, I was speaking to an SME owner yesterday, and they had reached out to me for some help last year, and they wanted a complete revamp of their existence, right? Like, so they have a large F&B operation across countries, but still a smaller company. And they wanted a lot of help with, how do we automate this? How do we automate that and everything? We made some recommendations. Finally, what they ended up doing is, picking the cheapest solution in every little niche, and finally not getting anywhere. A year later, and a
Yeah.
year's worth of failures later, they reached out to us again and said, "Oh, now can you help us?" Now we've realized and everything. So, but again, one of the points that I made to them yesterday was very similar to what you just said. I just realized at some point that if we want to be, like you mentioned, you have to understand technology for them, you have to understand problems for them, you have to do a lot of those things for them. The only thing you're probably not doing is paying for them, right? So otherwise,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure they would love that too as well, right? So is so like you said, right? I mean, we run companies and we know how difficult it is, right? If somebody comes to us and says, "Oh, there's a great software and go ahead with this," and this is a $6 million implementation or something, we probably are not ready for those kind of things as well. So I think, yeah, like you rightly mentioned, and for all our listeners who are selling to SMEs and selling in emerging markets, I think that's a very valuable lesson. One, make it easy, and secondly, what you mentioned, uh, be less of a consultant and productize more, right? So it just, as much as you can productize, and then finally the point that you made about in industry flavor. So in the sense, make it more relatable. So because they may not have the ability to visualize what how it would be customized to their particular industry or something. So the more you can sort of localize and customize and sort of, like you mentioned, give it that industrial that specific industry specific flavor, the better it'll be. Wow, that's exciting. I'm thinking of some of the things that we can learn from this and maybe implement in our businesses as well, because not only SMBs, I'm telling you, sometimes when we work with large corporations as well, we just feel like we are doing everything for them, other than maybe sending an email once in a while. But so yeah,
So
it's
just one more point I would like to
sure.
highlight here that I missed, and that is going to be latching onto the existing success. Okay,
Sure.
that could be another thing that your listeners may want to think about penetrating the SMB market, and
Right.
that sometimes people miss. Because let's say if you're going after a market that Salesforce is already present, right?
Right.
So you can actually penetrate that market if you try to integrate your product with, let's say, Salesforce, or it
Right.
could be with SAP or whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, if you pre-integrate,
Mm.
if your solution is going to be pre-integrated with the existing software that is already present in the account or at a client place, then
Mm.
you are reducing the friction. Because one of the questions that you mentioned in your comment, that your client had multiple different software, and one of the pain points that you are always going to get when you are dealing with technologies is, especially if you are going to be part of the main operations, right? Whether your tool or technology integrates with the existing software or not. Okay, so if you can already integrate that, that becomes a product. Then you are reducing the friction. So latch onto existing success.
I I think that's a wonderful point, and so off late we've been speaking to a lot of startup founders, and they are building their products to sort of ride on these mega sort of successful software. So whether it's Salesforce, whether it's HubSpot, whether it's Microsoft Teams. Now that's an
Yeah.
ecosystem that's coming alive as well. And actually, it took me many years to sort of learn that lesson, I must say, because I was trying to reinvent the wheel all the time and trying to go at it alone. And we were building products, and then we just realized how much easier it is to sort of, like you mentioned, ride the success of any other product. So
Yeah.
you become a part of that ecosystem, which brings me to the next question, though. And we speak with a lot of these so you have the Azure marketplace, and you have the Microsoft Teams marketplace, and you have HubSpot marketplace, and all these sort of marketplaces. So I mean, I know it makes sense in the sense that, it's easier for people to sort of find you, so you don't have to spend gazillions trying to educate the customer about how your product is useful. But what are some of the challenges that you see publishing, let's say, your application or your solution in some of these marketplaces? Because, and also, the other experience that we've had working with some of these marketplaces is that in a lot of ways it becomes more about you run a risk of sort of becoming a value added service to the overall offering and not really a very dependable standalone product. So what's your sort of take on that? Because I find it very interesting. I know it makes sense, but something about it feels like, firstly, I'm sure it's not as easy as it sounds. And secondly, I'm sure there are some drawbacks of following this approach as well. What are your thoughts on that?
So basically, here are the things, right? So depending upon what kind of idea you have, let's say if you are going after the enterprise market, okay,
Right.
my assumption here is going to be you are going after the enterprise market, either, some sort of CRM, ERP or HCM system, right? Those are the major ones.
Right.
So let's say if you are going after the existing market, I mean, if you have a simple idea, you are going to have a limit in terms of how much you can grow in that market, okay?
Right.
Or these enterprise guys are going to come after you and they'll kick you out from the market. That's how it works, right? So in your case, you would have developed this. Either you have a very industry specific solution that you somehow can compete with the big guys, right? Because you have very specific industry expertise that other big guys cannot provide just because they are attacking much larger market. That could be one way of looking at it. Or you are solving a very specific problem. Maybe you are simplifying the user experience and that could be one thing. Or maybe you are simply going into the functional problem. I mean, these are the kind of ideas that we see majorly in the startup space, right? So you are definitely going to run into challenge. Let's say even if you get to $10 million, $20 million, $30 million, $40 million, I don't know what your goal really is. If your goal is to really get to this point and then sell to somebody. So you have to always look at, okay, who's going to buy my company? Somebody has to buy. So if you create this around a startup around the ecosystem, right? For example, CRM or SCM, then you are sort of creating a sort of ecosystem that you are already aligning with that specific ecosystem. They might be able to invest in your technology. They might be able to provide the resources that you need to be able to be successful so that they can actually acquire. And this happens all the time. Let's take an example of, systems like NetSuite. NetSuite was, funded by Larry Ellison. Always. I mean, everybody was talking how behind Oracle is in terms of the cloud journey. But then, this guy was playing in the back, right? So this is how the startup ecosystem works right now. If you look at Salesforce, I mean, they have invested in I don't know how many startups. Okay, they are always looking at, okay, which are the startups that are going to be successful? So these startups or the ideas, they have to create some sort of market or revenue channel for them. And that's why they are interested in that. Now, coming back to your point about running the risk of, let's say, if you're creating an add-on and tomorrow, let's say, what they might do is they might create their own functionality and they might kick you out from the market. I think that's a risk that you are referring to, which is always going to be there. This risk is going to be there in every single, startup idea that you have, because somebody is going to run you over. I mean, that's how startups are. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So in this particular example, in my opinion, I think, if you align yourself with the bigger guys, then you have much higher chances of being successful. You are reducing your risk because you are going after a validated market as opposed to creating a new market. Creating a new market is always going to be far more difficult than aligning yourself in the existing market where the need already exists, the problem already exists.
Right. I mean, I think that's $1 million point that you made, and I think all the listeners should take note of that. And it's sometimes it takes years and years of trying something and then figuring it out, for yourself. But I think that's been one of my biggest learnings as well in terms of aligning yourself. So it does not necessarily mean that you have to, but
Yep.
it definitely increases your chances of success. And of course, the other thing that you spoke about, which a lot of founders dream of, is the exit. So for instance, if you're in that ecosystem and you make it easy or easier for a larger corporation to sort of continue to innovate or something, then you are a very, very sweet acquisition target for them, rather than you trying to create a new market for yourself. So that's a very, very fascinating point, and I think a lot of people would definitely benefit from that. So I mean, coming back to what I was talking about, the CRMs, right? So one of the things
Yep.
that I have throughout my career tried to figure out is, why do CRMs not work, right? So, and it's not just my observation. I've spoken to a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs. I've spoken to a lot of corporations. I know companies who are investing 25, 30, 40 million dollars annually for their CRM subscriptions per every account and everything, but it just seems like that mirage, that it would work so well, and it doesn't quite work. So I mean, I wanted to hear your thoughts. Since you're the specialist, what do you think? Do you think that the solutions are not customized to each of those organizations? Do you think there's some challenge in terms of adoption? Do you think that the systems are great, but maybe there is a lack of training within the teams, in terms of, the teams have not been trained, so it's not become a part of their lives? I mean, we've experienced a bit of all of these, but I don't quite know. I can't really put my finger on what exactly is the reason that it's a massive industry. Everyone needs a CRM, but I have never spoken to a company who says, oh, we use this CRM and we are wonderfully happy and couldn't be happier. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, so depending upon how it is perceived, by the way, Missy, you are referring to only CRM, right? I mean, see, I
Yes.
think it goes to any software out there, to be honest.
Right.
Because software, typically when you are talking about the business process software, right, they are designed around the processes. And processes are sort of the habits, if you really think about it.
Right.
Okay, everybody works differently. And you are actually trying to map those habits or the behaviors in a system, right? Now, you can't please everybody in an organization. So how would you please everybody with a software? There's no way. Okay. So this is the technology piece. And typically, yes, there are going to be challenges. Let's say if the CRM wasn't fit to begin with to meet the needs of the organization, the reason, let's say if they had selected the CRM just because it was number one or the best CRM out there, look, in case of software, it's always going to be very specific with the needs of a company. Okay, you should be looking at, okay, which is my industry that I am operating in? What are the needs of my users? What are the unique things that are needed for my company, my organization, my industry, and find the solution that is going to be right fit for that, as opposed to going after the ranking. Now, coming back to the point about, let's say if everything is all right from the technology perspective, tool is not a problem. Okay. Your major challenge always is going to be people. Okay. That's what we talk about. And the reason for that is because change is hard, right? When you are trying to map these user behaviors on a system, it's always going to be hard, because the new system adoption requires the way you operate, the way you do your jobs. Okay, if you give people a lot of room, they are sort of going to find their workaround that is going to overload the system, that is going to overload the data. And now we are opening the whole can of worms here, right? So again, it's not really the specific software or the technology. By the way, right now you are only talking about CRM. Okay. Again, if you talk about other systems that have slightly more control, ERP, I mean, if you talk to anybody, they all hate ERP system. Everybody does. Okay, nobody likes ERP system. But end of the day, when you get into the finances, when you talk about the accounting, and when you talk about business rules, they are always slightly harder. But you have to have control in your company. You have to have those business rules in the company, irrespective of whether people like it or not. Right. Otherwise, you are actually going to create financial loophole, and that is not good for anybody in the company. So again, going back to your question about, is it the problem is with CRM, problem is with ERP? In my opinion, it's always people factor. So that's why we have change management consultant. There are official change management consultants. And what they do is they map the change from one system to the next. They take out the tool from the equation, okay, in the enterprise market. But I'm actually going to point one thing out. I don't think everybody is going to be unhappy with their CRM software. I've seen a lot of companies that are happy as well, depending upon what the organization is. Not everybody complains, but obviously things can be improved. But yeah, I mean, I've seen good CRM implementations.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are definitely are. It's just that I think sometimes it's also a question of expectations, in the sense that So I think their sales teams do a pretty good job of selling the system. So obviously, when you speak with a lot of CEOs, they're like, "Oh wow, I mean, it's all right," but the kind of expectations that we had was, "Oh, this is going to be transformational for our customer relationships and all of those things." And yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of it is about people. I mean, a lot of it is about your employees trying to get accustomed to a new system, and do they make it a part of their lives. So I was speaking to one of the largest pharma companies globally, and they spend millions and millions of dollars every year only on their CRM. And funny thing, and I was conducting a sort of a workshop for their marketing teams, and then they said, "So what do you?" So one of the questions that I asked was, "So what are some of the challenges that you face with your CRM system?" And I did not get a response because none of them had ever used their CRM system at the company. And these are marketing leaders from 5 different countries. And
Exactly.
so somebody in the HQ decides that they want this system. So I think, yeah, you're right in the sense that, of course, it's not the system itself. It's about, how ready we are to sort of, adopt that. And of course, the other thing that you mentioned, which is quite interesting as well, is don't just go by the rank of how big a CRM system or an ERP system or any other system is basically just see how good a fit is it for your organization as well. So which brings me to the next question, something that we were sort of discussing earlier is, there's this definite move towards, low code or no code in terms of, so what's your sense? Do you think that we are gradually coming to an end of the mega ERP systems and the CRM systems? Do you think we are coming to an age where organizations will use micro systems in the sense, so like for instance, they may have a completely different solution to to handle part A of the business and a completely different solution to handle part B and then they have some nice seamless integration at the back end. Do they really need those mega systems that your organization depends on, or are we or is it a very premature conversation and you think the mega systems have a long way to go? Yeah.
Well, so everything has a value in the ecosystem, okay? Low code, no code is going to have its own value. Best of breed that you are mentioning, it's going to have its own value in specific industries and the enterprises. The way companies make decisions, they don't go by the marketing hype. So what you are hearing is the marketing hype, to be honest, okay? So majority of the time, what you hear in the news is not necessarily true. Okay, so when you talk about these mega systems going away, that's not how companies make decisions. In fact, right now, if you look at the banking and insurance, I mean, companies still use mainframes. They cannot afford to. You talk about airlines, you talk about travel. I mean, they cannot afford to replace Sabre. I don't know whether you know the Sabre system or your audience knows the Sabre. That's the ticketing system that they have in the airline, and there's no way they can afford to replace that because that is one of the most sophisticated system ever built, and nobody could really design the kind of sophistication that Sabre system has. The same goes right now. I mean, ERP is the new mainframe, to be honest. Okay, so if all of a sudden somebody decides that I'm actually going to build a new ERP and I'm going to replace everything that existed in the legacy or monolithic ERP world, that's not how it is going to work, right? Companies don't replace their operational backbone just like that. In fact, that's a challenge for every single ERP company out there. You talk about SAP, you talk about Infor, you talk about Oracle, you talk about Epicor, whoever you are talking about, right? They are not able to replace the financial backbone, okay? Even if the technology is far newer, even though they have access to far newer technology, the way companies like to think and like to work, okay, and like to decide on the enterprise system is going to be this way. So first thing, they are going to look at, okay, let's say if I'm the manufacturer, do I a technology or a product that I can buy out of the box. That's how CFO thinks, right? That because they are the ones who are actually cutting the check. They have to look at the financial risk, right? I mean, see, you can design the fancy system, but they have to look at, okay, if you have never designed, if I cannot see it, how am I going to feel it? How am I going to feel comfortable investing $1 million, especially if I have a system sitting right there, okay, that is already built. Maybe it's not incomplete. Maybe it does not do the job as good as you are claiming that you might be able to do, but you are still in a very R&D phase. Here because you haven't designed this, you haven't tested this, right? So there is a clear risk. So the way companies like to make decision is it's always going to be, can I find something that is going to work for my company, my industry out of the box? That is number one. Okay. Second is going to be low code, no code. That is going to be based on the skills that you have in your organization. If you have tons and tons of programmers, okay, low code and no code will not make sense for you because programmers are going to be faster in programming technologies, right? They are going to prefer that. So they will not appreciate or like the low code or no code, to be honest, just because that could be because the way programmers work, they are going to be very keyboard centric. They are going to be very code driven. Okay. The low code and no code, they are designed for slightly more business users. If your programmers are, let's say they are fairly sophisticated in business, then they would they might be able to use low code, no code. But let's say if your business people cannot transfer the knowledge to your programmers, then they have to think about coding, right? So depending upon the industry, depending upon the context, depending upon the situation, in my opinion, depending upon the skill set of the company, the companies will be deciding whether, they want to go for low code, no code. It's never going to be binary decision that, what, I'm going to kick out my SAP today and I'm actually going to build SAP from scratch on my own using the low code technology. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and definitely not going to work that way for the foreseeable future, for sure. And I think a lot of it could be hype as well. And there is a definite sort of move towards it, because also one of the challenges that, let's say, a lot of startups are facing the fact that they can't find the right developers, they can't find the right engineers, so they have no choice, right? So they don't have a choice in terms of building systems. So in fact, I was speaking with this entrepreneur the other day, and his startup's doing quite well, and he was saying that one of the things that they did quite early is sort of told themselves that, okay, we are not going to try and build everything. Right. So in the sense, and we'll just focus on our core offering, and, we'll have a lot of other existing systems to sort of support us, and it's worked quite well for them. So for instance, something that you had mentioned earlier in the conversation as well is in the fact that they entered an industry, they focused on just enhancing the user experience. So instead of rebuilding something which is, which will probably take them years. And secondly, it's so difficult to find those guys also, right? I mean, if you speak to any sort of tech entrepreneur, I'm telling you, the first thing that they'll talk about is not finding people or enough people that way. So yeah, I mean, it's not going to be binary. So I think for all the listeners, if you read 50 articles a week, I read 2 this morning about low code and no code. So it's not something that's happening today. And even if it happens, right, you have to see what's right for your organization. It could be a combination of the two. It could be, for a newer business unit, for some new product that you are developing or something, a no code or a low code approach can work. But, you can, like you mentioned, it can take and I've seen that inertia. I've seen the challenge of trying to replace or even upgrade an existing system, right? So we work with clients and, with their legacy systems, and that's a multi-year decision. It's not even like something that can be done. Oh yeah, today, this morning we decided we are going to change our ERP. So yeah, I mean, just good to know what's happening in that space as well. But again, I think the decisions should be made, like Sam, you mentioned, based on what your requirements are specifically. So that's great. So I mean, let's before I let you go, just a couple of things I wanted to check with you. I always get our guests to make some predictions,
Yeah.
and so, and not just about Bitcoin price predictions, but, so in the sense that maybe you could share some of your predictions in the tech space. So what are some of the sort of emerging trends that you see and that you feel that over the next 3 to 5 years, something would really gain a lot of prominence? I mean, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah. So in my case, I like to talk about technology, but technology has to provide the real business value. That's how I like to think. Okay.
Right.
So the technology trend that we have, even though we are talking about, okay, what is next? Okay, AI is already done, cloud is already done.
Right.
Okay. But if you look at the penetration of cloud at this point of time, not every organization is on cloud. They are still running the legacy systems. They are still very much on prem. And one of the challenges that companies are facing is how to move these workloads to cloud. So, right now, I don't know if it is 20%, 30%, somewhere around that. So we still have massive opportunity for next 20 years. Okay, in case of cloud. Now, the trends, right? So the trend is going to be now, a lot of companies are claiming that they are cloud, but the real cloud is the user experience that you get when you use a system, right? So that user experience is not there in those legacy systems. Even if they are claiming that they are cloud, but it's still very old code. It's still very legacy code. There are newer systems that are very good on cloud, but they don't really have the deep functionality that industries care for. So one of the things that you are going to see in the next 5 to 7 years, number one, there is going to be a heavy push for the industry specific functionality. Software is going to be slightly more productized. It's going to be more packaged. Okay. Yes, the low code, no code is going to be there because you are reducing the financial risk for the companies as opposed to starting something. At least you are removing the technical risk. But again, it depends upon how you define the solution architecture, as I mentioned, in the conversation. AI is going to be very prevalent. You might not see AI as much. You might not be interacting with AI as much, but that actually drives a lot of user experience. So when you look at the modern ERP system, especially the ERP system, CRM system, they use a lot of AI in the background. For example, let's say if I look at my Gmail right now, Gmail is using a lot of AI. And if you search from Gmail to Outlook, that's a switch. That's a change for a lot of us. Just because you don't have that assistance, you don't have that spell check, you don't have that. So AI is going to be very penetrated in our business processes, in the way the software is built. Again, there are every technology that you can probably think of, in my opinion, that is going to make its way in the way we are using the systems. I would not ignore anything out there. I would not say that anything is hotter than the other or something is going to be phased out. Everything has some sort of application. Now, if you are looking for the next big unicorn, I don't know that.
Yeah, sure. No, I was looking for some stock tips. So no, but
invest in Snowflake right now. They have the largest market.
Okay, sure. Thanks for the tip. I'll do that. Right. So, thanks so much. I think, that was a very sort of pragmatic answer. I think the way you've sort of outlined it is, very real in the sense, and I can see that sense of realism in everything that you do. Like you said, actual execution, actual impact that it has on organizations as well. So yeah, don't get carried away by buzzwords. Like for instance, you mentioned cloud. So for instance, when people say, what happens is, we can live in bubbles.
Yep.
We live in our own sort of bubbles. And so, for instance, especially a lot of people in the tech space, for instance, I speak to people and they only talk about NFTs right now, as NFTs have taken over the world or something. And I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day saying, I'm sure not even 0.01% of the world population knows what NFT is, right? So in the sense, it may be something. So like, I mean, the reason I'm saying that is, when you're building products, when you're building services, and of course, it's great to be ahead of the curve, but don't just do it because you see it's a buzzword. Do it because if you're solving a problem, and like you mentioned, cloud, so people say, oh, cloud is boring now, let's do something else. But like you said, if you look at the penetration, it may be 20%, 30%. AI, for instance, people say, oh, now this technology is already done and dusted. It doesn't quite work that way. I mean, and again, I always use the example of the vaccines and the fact that, oh, now the vaccines are here. And I'm sure like billions of people would not get the vaccine in the next 2 to 3 years as well. So everything's very relative, in geographically, in terms of, penetration, in terms of, so yeah, I think the best way to look at it is if you are able to solve a problem and if you are able to see how, and like you very rightly pointed out earlier, that, jump to the systems and jump to the tools later, but try to see what the problems are. It's been a very, very insightful conversation. Sam Gupta, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We wish you all the best for everything that you're doing, and you're doing some absolutely amazing work. I hope you get to impact hundreds and thousands of startups in the near future, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.